And Sedinka, over to you. Whenever you're ready, I will hit go live.
Go ahead and go live.
Awesome. Let's get started, y'all.
Okay, good morning. We're going to let folks join, and then I'll begin the presentation in about a minute. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our participants and our observers. We really appreciate you joining us. My name is Zdenka Willis. I'm a former president of the Marine Technology Society. Along with MTS, these dialogues are being sponsored by the Global Ocean Observing System, industry partners Kongsberg Discovery and L3 Harris, and supported by a grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the United States Integrated Ocean Observing System. This is our third Dialogue with Industry series, and we're focused on ocean observing of the future. Let's begin with an overview of the ocean enterprise. To understand it, we need to first consider the ocean or blue economy. According to the OECD, the ocean economy encompasses both established maritime sectors such as fishing, shipping, and oil and gas, along with emerging industries including offshore renewable energy, aquaculture, marine mineral extraction, tourism, maritime monitoring and surveillance, and marine biotechnology. According to the OECD's April 2025 report, Ocean Economy to 2050, the ocean economy would rank as the fifth largest economy if it was considered a country. Between 1995 and 2020, it contributed approximately 3 to 4% of global gross value added, or GVA, and supported employment for up to 133 million full-time equivalents. As well, the global ocean economy increased from 1.3 trillion US dollars to 2.6 trillion, with an average annual growth rate of 2.8%. If current trends persist, estimates suggest the global ocean economy could be nearly 4 times its 1995 level by 2050. The ocean enterprise represents an integral segment of the broader ocean economy, focused on ocean observation, forecasting, and related services across the public, private, and academic sectors. Stakeholders within the ocean enterprise deliver observations, infrastructure, measurements, forecasting, and operational services that inform decision-making in the marine context. All of you are part of the ocean enterprise. The Ocean Enterprise Initiative developed from a successful Dialogue with Industry series held in 2022 and 2023, and a subsequent development of the Dialogues with Industry roadmap. Our mission is to grow the ocean observing system through better public and private partnerships, and by creating a globally inclusive forum to understand market opportunities, incentivize ocean solution innovation, facilitate data and information exchange, develop a workforce, and proliferate scalable technology to achieve benefits for stakeholders across the entirety of the ocean enterprise. The roadmap lays out 3 priority areas you see on the slide, along with some of the types of activities under our initiatives, such as this dialogue. The Ocean Information Value Chain is a framework that describes how ocean observations are converted through a wide range of interactions, transformation, and service delivery mechanisms into products that have value to society, decision makers, and business leaders. The value chain approach highlights the significance of ocean information and services, with this graph showing how the ocean enterprise and its activities connect the information value chain. The blue discs at the bottom represent the present extent of private sector participation, providing an estimate of the current relative market size. The arrows indicate projected growth potential for private industry in each segment. All market segments have opportunities to benefit from innovation, and these advancements can be leveraged commercially. But what defines a mature ocean enterprise? On this slide, we have proposed a statement of what a mature ocean enterprise could look like. We offer this as background for you to consider as these discussions unfold. We would love your thoughts on this definition in both the discussion and in the chat. As the planning team for these dialogues convened, it was noted that definitions for accessible and low-cost technologies were not available. Following a lot of discussion, the team has suggested the definitions shown on the slide. Both are characterized as a combination of sensor, instrument, and platforms affordability in terms of cost, operations, and maintenance. With accessibility, we provided a definition in terms of reduction in magnitude of the cost. For low cost, we proposed a definition both terms of a threshold price and a magnitude of cost. For the price threshold, we note that there could be a differentiation related to observed parameters, but generally less than 1,000 US dollars is the threshold. We will not specifically discuss these definitions, nor have these definitions been endorsed by the ocean observing community, but again are offered as context for the discussion. We are again happy for you to provide comments in the chat, which will then be used in the dialogue reports and the background paper. We developed a new graphic to augment the ocean information value chain. Using the radar chart, we mapped the currently prevailing trends together with an estimate of the level of technology readiness, time to prevalence, and their potential impact on the ocean enterprise. The center of the diagram illustrates area with lower technology readiness and a longer projected time before market impact is expected. The greater the radial distance, the more advanced the trend, and the shorter anticipated time to full impact. The size of each point reflects the potential magnitude of a given trend. Certain trends are present across multiple market segments. The highest concentration of trends is associated with the initial market segment, ocean technologies, with frequency declining along the value chain. This distribution may reflect an inherent bias due to the author's focus on observing technologies, or it may accurately indicate current patterns of innovation within the sector. Here is the corresponding key for the numbers on the radar chart. Those that are in orange we judge to specifically enable accessible ocean technologies. Once again, we are putting the diagram out as context, and we'd really like the ocean enterprise to comment on this both in the chat and directly to the Ocean Enterprise Initiative team. These dialogues aim to improve understanding of market aggregation and demand opportunities for scaling technologies that support innovation and bring them to market more quickly. What differentiates these dialogues is rather than relying on a single panel or a session at various ocean-related venues and conferences, which are all valuable, our planning team has dedicated considerable effort to developing 3 interrelated dialogues. We invite your input regarding actionable recommendations, and our moderator will guide discussions toward practical outcomes. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's discussions. Hans is a member of our MTS team and serves as the Senior Director of the Ocean Enterprise Initiative. Prior to joining the Ocean Enterprise Initiative, Hans was the director of the Great Lakes Water Studies Institute at Northwestern Michigan College, and before that spent 2 decades at the University of Michigan as a researcher, engineer, and administrator spanning hydrodynamics, ocean engineering, and marine technology. In advance, let me thank everyone for what I know will be a robust conversation, and to you, Hans, for moderating. So we look forward to this conversation. And Hans, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Anenka. I appreciate the introduction. It's my pleasure to join everyone here today for the second dialogue session in our series on ocean observing of the future. I'm just going to go through some nuts and bolts of how we're going to lay this out. And for our invited participants, we're going to ask that you keep your video on during the discussion and invite you to use the raise hand feature so that I can call on you to share your thoughts with the group. There are going to be some cases where I may direct a question to a particular participant or group of participants. And in the interest of keeping the discussion moving, I may shift to a new question before I've been able to call on everyone that has raised their hand. And I apologize in advance to anyone that I might miss or cut short. In the interest of time, I will not introduce each of you, but I'll instead ask that each of you introduce yourselves when you first speak to the audience. And that could be your name, your role, and the organization that you represent. For our audience, I would ask that you listen to the conversation and please type your questions or thoughts into the Q&A for everyone to see. You can also layer in feedback to the questions or comments posted by everybody else. For everyone, just please remember to keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking. And today's layout, it's going to be divided into 4 sessions. And we've set aside about 35 minutes for questions and discussion in each of the first 3 sessions. There'll be a short break in between so people can get up and stretch their legs and refresh their coffee. But depending on how the conversation goes, I may shorten or extend a particular session. And then our final session will be an open discussion among both our participants and the observers. And please note that this dialogue, the Q&A, and the chat are all being recorded and will be made publicly available in the coming weeks. The content of the session report, however, will not include any attribution to the comments or questions of any participant. So let's get started. I think this is going to be a great conversation and a lot of interaction between the group that we've got assembled. And let's dive into our first component, which examines the barriers and bottlenecks for companies to reduce the cost of sensors and platform. And I'll just lead off with a basic summary where we'll then engage in the questions that our participants have had some chance to review. And that is, cost does remain a major obstacle to wider use of ocean sensors and technologies. And that's driven from multiple factors: R&D, specialized materials for the rugged environment that they must endure, long-term, short-term maintenance needs, deployment infrastructure requirements, availability of skilled workforce, and then equally important, a limited understanding of the overall market demand. So there's a component there that really can create a barrier or bottleneck. So lowering costs requires identifying all these key price drivers, enabling economies of scale. And additionally, while many new and perhaps more advanced sensors and platforms are being developed through grant and public funding, there's a greater need for collaboration between the public and private sectors, where the balance between innovation and affordability is considered while continuing to maintain open science principles. So to kick this off, I'm going to open up with the first discussion question, and that is, if the market demand remains the same, what strategies could be used to reduce costs, and what are the potential impacts? That might mean customer support, costs going to end users, investing in co-investing in development, or shifting business models to rental or subscription. And everything's on the table. We'll also put the question in the chat so people can review that, but please raise your hand if you'd like to jump in on this first question. Pete.
Hi there, Pete Marchetto, research engineer and instrumentation scientist with FieldKit, a not-for-profit instrument maker. One of the strategies that we've been using for the work that we've been doing, especially insofar as looking at water chemistry and such, is just trying to figure out how much of the cost that we're seeing, especially insofar as the sensors that we're buying, is just essentially brand related. So we've been doing a deep look at evaluating different sensors from different suppliers and seeing if the lower cost ones can essentially be sorted to make them less expensive and yet still as durable and as reliable. It's more labor on the front end, and for us as a not-for-profit, we're happy to take that on since we're grant funded, but it's a challenge. But that is one way that we've certainly addressed that. Just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Pete. Lauren.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Laurent Begri. I work at Alcima. We are developing gliders. When it comes to cost, there are two things to get into your mind. One is the capex cost, cost of capital cost, the one you pay when you buy the instrument, and this is mainly driven by competitivity, and competitivity is driven by volume. So the more system there is sold every year in the market, the lower the price should be mechanically. But the other one is the OPEX. And at Alcima, in order to lower the operational cost, we try to design our system easy to use. And we design now as well the data flow to be sent in a fair way to all the data banks that exist. And when you share your data, somehow the price of your data is reduced because you acquired it once and you use it several times.
No, good point. Let's go Paul, then Greg, then Fernando.
Hi, Paul, Obscape. We do a wide range of environmental monitoring solutions and devices for the market. I find there is a lot of demand in the market for low cost. It is becoming quite full at the moment, however, and it is almost as such equalizing itself out. So it's not as expensive as it was, but it still is quite pricey for some groups or researchers as well. What we found has been quite effective has been if you were to get together with a consortium. So have a central procurement system in there where people can buy in bulk. So it might not work so well with large organizations or industry, but when you have researchers, particularly in universities, if they were to join up with other universities to form almost like a coalition, you could get bigger discounts based on bulk buying and better ability to really negotiate that price down, because I think everybody joins on the bandwagon of my technology can do this and save you that. But at the end of the day, it's the buyer that has the capacity to buy where they want. And if they do have negotiating power, that's what's going to drive the market down.
Great. No, thanks, Paul. Greg?
So I think there are a couple of options, a couple of things at play here. The first is that, as Laurent was saying, the operational expenses are significant, particularly when you deploy in non-coastal locations. I should say, although it's in my title, I'm with ABR, who makes oceanographic instrumentation. And the cost of deployment, not the cost of the instrumentation, is usually the most significant factor. A CTD that costs you $10,000 will cost you $100,000 a day to take the ship out. And so sometimes targeting on the cost of the sensors is irrelevant, because the cost of deployment in the locations that are genuinely interesting for long-term science, as opposed to coastal monitoring, the equation is that way. And without a full economic costing that applies through people's grants, where ship time is recognized as a dollar cost, as opposed to just you got 10 days of ship time, you won't see that. The second is that the total cost of ownership of the sensor is also dictated, if it's a deployment recovery type scenario, it's dictated by the time interval between deployment and recovery. And so one of the ways that, for instance, for the Argo program, we've been able to reduce the cost per profile of the Argo floats is by reducing the power consumption. And our sensors reduce the power consumption by a factor of 10 compared to a market competitor. That has a direct impact in the power budget of the vehicle, the Argo float in that case, or in the case of Alsamar, we're able to make a big impact on the deployment time of the glider. So total cost of sensors and targeting $1,000 as a nominal value, I think is a bit of a straw man argument. It's not actually taking into account the cost of the entire measurement that you're trying to make.
No, thanks, Greg. We're going to move on, and Fernando, please go ahead, and we'll wrap up this question, which has bled into our second question beyond lowering costs. So we'll go through, well, continue on, and then I'll get the queue going after that.
Hello, I'm Fernando Lima. I'm an academic, but also have a startup that makes small temperature loggers and other environmental sensors. Well, so we have been able to lower costs by designing very sturdy devices. And by doing that, you just like Greg was saying, we can dilute the cost, and the cost per measurement is very tiny. And I think that's a nice idea. An idea that may be related with the next discussion is many of us work with different low-cost sensors that measure the same parameter. If those parameters are somehow aggregated in larger platforms, then the data from a type of sensor can actually be reused by other people interested in other things. So, just by pulling the data from these different sensors, we can increase the longevity of and use, and so the cost per use and per unit per bit of data lowers. That's the idea I wanted to leave here.
Oh, thank you. Jethan, Nadia, and then Juliet.
Hi everyone, Jethan Dotman from South African Environmental Observation Network. One of the projects I'm working on, CoLab, Coastal Observations Lab in a Box. What we are trying to do is reduce costs by increasing capacity, so regional capacity or local capacity. So through that you can better maintain your instruments and use the instruments more effectively. Yeah, just thought I'd throw that in. Thanks.
Nadia.
Yes, my name is Nadia. I'm working as a chemical engineer for a private company called 4H Gina Engineering. And we are producing instruments for the measurement of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. And what keeps the cost of our instruments a little bit higher maybe than necessary is that the same type of measurement technology had to be super versatile over the years. That means the same type of instrument needs to be used in coastal areas as well as deep sea. And this versatility makes it quite complex to produce them in relevant numbers, but also very cheap. So if there would be like one type of deployment that would be done, or we get an order for one type of instrument in an order of 200 exemplars, that could decrease the cost significantly.
Thank you, Nadia. Juliet.
Thanks, Juliet from the National Research Foundation in South Africa. I thought Greg was spot on, but another thing is in terms of OPEX costs is ensuring that the sensors are easy to repair or upgrade locally. So you don't need so much manufacturer support, you don't need to send things away. And that doesn't just help reduce costs, but in countries where a lot of the measurement is done via governments, government institutes, the actual supply chain for sending instruments away is such a nightmare that many expensive instruments just sit and get used. And then once they need to be maintained, you can't send them away to maintain them. So being able to maintain them in-house, or if they're modular and you can sort of fix little different parts, that would make a huge difference.
Yeah. No, very good point. I'm gonna stop this thread right now just so we can get through some of these next questions. But next question I want to ask is really related to how can public funding be targeted to create opportunities for co-development of sensors or platforms with private sector when a gap is discovered? So how can we unlock more of the sharing of the cost in these development cycles to ensure better accessibility? Clara.
So this is a pretty common practice for us. It really is how we do development. So we'll do the engineering side of it, and the user, whoever we go into the project with, will work on it together, and they'll do all of the testing, the validation, improvements, all of that. So that part is impossible for us. We're not users, we're not scientists. So that's a critical piece.
Yeah, great, thank you. Evan.
Hi all, I'm Evan Shapiro. I'm a co-founder and CTO of SOFAR Ocean. We scale large sensing networks to power our ocean data and intelligence platform. We also develop our own hardware and make it commercially available. A lot of the work that we've done, I think a lot of the work that everyone in the space done ultimately does tie to public funding already. And I think something that's interesting is that there's a big gap between the actual need from the sensing and the requirements that ultimately get sent on the sensing and the platforms. And more often than not, the requirements are bad. Things will be over-specified and over-engineered, or under-specified and under-engineered. So I think something that would be more productive for public funding engagement would be to focus on outcomes and then let the researchers and the engineers figure out what the requirements should be, what the capabilities of the systems should be, rather than setting these kind of arbitrary capabilities that end up fracturing the space into different sets of accuracies and specs and combinations, and nobody can really explain why we have these very specific rules when the outcomes we're trying to get to are pretty messy, real world, high level, abstract things.
Thanks, Evan. Michael.
I'm Michael Jones. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Subsea Sail. We're making disruptively affordable, long duration, 100% energy harvesting vehicles. They can go out for months at a time. The US government, of course, is right now, the Defense Department is spending a lot of money really promoting the small, the agile, and the mini. And so we think that that's going to help drive the price down. We decided to go directly to contract manufacturing. I think a lot of people in this industry have hand-built vehicles, partially because the volume was so low. And as we talk about lower price vehicles going out for months at a time, the admonition we typically get is, but the sensors are going to be, very expensive, particularly when you get into things like electronic warfare or sophisticated communications. We're trying to make vehicles that can be used really anywhere in the world. And as Laurent said, we look at CapEx, OpEx, and the total cost of ownership. And so as weather changes and we have more violent storms, and as we have more lightning strikes, as we get tens of thousands of vehicles in the ocean, we think that creates a huge vulnerability, and the total cost of ownership is going to be very high. So our vehicles can go underwater, which means they can hide from bad weather and lightning strikes and things like that. So we think that's going to be critically important over the next 20, 30 years, because you have to think about the total cost of ownership, not just the CapEx. Think of us like a movable sonobuoy, which start at $1,000 and go up to, 5 or 1,000 per unit, but you put out 130 or 150 of those, plus the time to get up there with a P3 or P8, and you're talking about $750,000 to make a deployment that's going to last you 6 to 8 hours. So the fact that the sensor is $1,000 doesn't mean very much if you could have replaced that with a long-term vehicle that can last for months and do the same job. So I think we have to be a little careful about $1,000 vehicle sensor because they exist. Some of the sonobuoys are $1,000, but they don't work longer than 6 or 8 hours, and they require a lot of support and a lot of cost.
No, thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Good comment there. We'll move on to Chris.
And so I'm Chris Lewis from CatchCam Technologies. One area where I think public funding could help for private companies is to provide some sort of minimum order quantity or market so that the risk of development is lowered for the private sector. So if we're going ahead and developing new low-cost sensors, we're always thinking, is there a market out there? Is there enough volume? So this is one area where public funding can come in, they can assist in parallel and sort of ensure that if the market doesn't develop, at least some of the risk is taken out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jethan, we'll let you wrap up this question and then we'll move on to our next one.
I just thought I'd throw in what the South African government is trying to do. So it's part of a research roadmap where the government is funding research infrastructures. And so there's national facilities that will procure a lot of the instruments, the high cost instruments, and provide some level of capacity to operate and maintain them. And then this is made freely available to the science community within South Africa. Yeah, I think that's one way of the South African government trying to sort of consolidate costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. All right, I'm going to shift a little bit down the road and next question, and that is, how can private sector and research universities best collaborate to address the need for R&D for observing sensors and platforms? Pete.
Saying this as a relatively recently former academic myself, I feel as though the main thrust of that endeavor needs to be to get your technology transfer game up to speed very, very quickly. Because the thing is that universities are not well suited at all for production runs of things. And being able to create the most optimized, elegant version of a system in a university environment as a prototype doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be fieldable that way. So being able to go from like TRL 6 to TRL 9 based on something that came up to 6 in a university environment quickly, and being able to transfer that IP out so that it can be built quickly, I think is really, that's a relationship that those universities, I think, need to start building through their technology licensing offices early on and pursuing often. Because the thing is that otherwise this stuff doesn't percolate out. Speaking as somebody who used to design marine acoustic recorders at Cornell, we had such a restrictive IP policy that we actually wound up selling things to the Navy as if they were production runs instead of exporting the IP such as it was to a contract manufacturer who should have been doing that instead. So just my take.
Yeah, no, thank you. Sebastian, you had your hand up. I don't know if you pulled it down. Would you like to chime in here?
Yeah, hey, Hans. My connection is unstable, so I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can, yes.
I can't hear you.
We are hearing you.
I can't hear you, so I'm just going to talk and hopefully it will come through.
Okay.
Okay. Nice to meet you all. Good to be here. I'm Sebastian. I'm the co-founder and CEO of OceanSync, and we specialize in collecting weather and other data from commercial ocean-going vessels. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to Sebastian.
Yeah, let's do that.
Once, yeah.
Katie, let's go on to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Croft Bell. I'm the founder and president of the Ocean Discovery League. It's a nonprofit based in Rhode Island in the United States. And our focuses on accelerating deep sea exploration and research through more accessible technologies and also broadening the community of people that use them. And I want to second Pete's comment about this relationship between academia and industry, because we have, well, the first thing is how to best collaborate. First of all, just talk to us. We have tons of ideas and research and like a lot of answers to the questions that have been asked here, especially with regard to deep sea benthic observations. But we don't have the expertise, the infrastructure to actually build the tools that we need. And one great example right now is a project that we're doing with Blue Robotics, funded by IUSE, to create a deep sea lander that can go to 6,000 meters for under $10,000. And so we bring to the table a whole lot of experience and research in this space, a lot of collaborators all over the world, particularly in places that don't have access to these kinds of tools. And so they have very different experiences from a lot of the people, here in this room. And Blue Robotics obviously brings very strong industry, engineering, manufacturing, supply chain, all the things that we don't have. So that relationship has been going well, and we're really excited to see how this project grows into the future, and hopefully, becomes something that's manufactured and commercialized.
Great. No, thank you. Let's go. We'll wrap this question with Juliet and then Paul.
Thanks. So just going back to what the previous speaker said about the technology license offices and the R&D and offices in academic institutes, I think a lot of academics don't really know they exist, and they have no idea that what they're doing can actually be promoted. And so I think we really need to enhance that those offices are there. They need to become more visible, but also to look at joint R&D projects where universities can develop the core sense technologies and private companies can sort of optimize these for mass production, but also to look at secondments and internships and joint training programs between students and early career researchers, so that they can really gain knowledge and information about industry, and industry can gain from their knowledge and scientific approach.
No, good points. Paul, I'll wrap up this question with you.
Perfect. My name is Jason. I work with Paul. We're sharing the same link, so excuse the name. Work at Obscape. And to reiterate what Katie said, I think academia has got such great ideas, and it's just about linking each individual silos to put them together. And a way that we could work together was sensor manufacturers and research institutions could find dual use technologies for different industries, whether it's agriculture / aeronautics, to include that in ocean research and try and share those learnings to gain scale and increase the sort of scope of the project and reduce the costs herein.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Sorry for miscommunicating your name too. Okay, so I'm going to shift the question to now the third leg of the stool, perhaps, and that is, if industry does not perceive that the market for accessible or low-cost sensors is large enough to warrant their participation, what are some creative funding or incentives that can accelerate this market space?
Well, it's not particularly creative, but grants and philanthropy that perhaps encourage, I don't want to say force, but encourage academia or research institutions. Technically, I'm not in academia, but our nonprofit is pretty academic, and pairs that with a company to perhaps encourage this movement of prototypes and ideas into the marketplace.
Thanks, Katie. Mark.
Myself on here. I'm Mark Dansker. I'm the founder and executive director of Fisheye Collaborative. And we, among other things, are making a low-cost acoustic recorder. Well, it bridges somewhere in between the low-cost and accessible in that space. And I suppose my answer to that question is that we started developing this because we needed a recorder that was in that space. And so for our own uses, for our own research, we're going to save enough money by creating our own and doing it in a way that's works and meets the needs of the community that we've spoken with. We've identified a gap that's good for us. By the time we're done developing it and we buy our first 40 or 50 of our own sensors, we'll have paid the cost of R&D and we can sell them for a reasonable rate. And then, you know, afford to do the work ourselves and hopefully provide something into the community. And as a nonprofit, you know, we've learned from the academic sector and the NGO sector and the government sector is what is really needed. How we make a sustainable business out of that is another thing altogether. But in terms of getting us in the door and making a sensor that fits this category, a lot of it is because we needed it. I think that might not be a regular way to do it as we're not a classical manufacturer.
Sure. No. Lauren, on to you. All right, let's move forward then to Clara.
So I forgot to say who I was last time. I'm Clara Hulbert, and I work for Teledyne Marine Vehicles. So the Slocum gliders, Sentinel gliders, Gavia AUVs, Sea Raptor AUV, Osprey AUV, and the Apex profiling floats and the Ocean Science boat. So probably one you wanted to know. When we integrate sensors, we work on this all the time, obviously, with all those vehicles. It's very straightforward. First, we have to identify that there is a gap in our current offerings. Then we have to identify if there's an addressable market, not just that, you know, somebody wants to write a paper. It has to be a market the larger community has. And then this is the simplest part. We have to have orders. So if we don't have orders, we're not going to build it because we have been bit by that before. Well, everybody thinks it's a great idea. We have to know that it is going to be adopted by the larger community. And so the cost of those sensors, the community's driving it. So if they are interested in that accessible or low cost sensor, then we're going to integrate it.
Yeah. Yeah, that perception is maybe the most basic. It's got to be needed out there. So, all right. So we're getting close on time in the session. So, Michael and Evan, you can just do some quick inputs here, and then we'll move on to our last question of the session. And Lauren, I see you're back on. Maybe I'll go back to you because you disappeared a few times. So please go ahead.
You want Lauren to go ahead, right?
Yeah, I'll have, yeah, he's been, I don't know if you're having.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I saw it was last. Yeah, just a quick comment. It's really finding money to build a prototype is very easy, but putting it, industrialize it and you know, selling it to people, that's what costs a lot of money to company, and this money is never back. So that's where I would encourage people, especially small companies.
Great. No, thank you. All right, Michael, and then Evan, and keep it short if you can, guys.
Okay, so we make a vehicle that works at the air-water interface and then can go underwater. And almost everything exists is either an unmanned surface vessel or it's an unmanned underwater vehicle. There aren't people typically that are both in the air and underwater. So for example, we've looked high and low. We're looking always for low swap sensors. And there aren't many that we find that can work above the water and go below the water. And an anemometer is a great example. You know, they only work above water. If you take them underwater, they don't work anymore. So we're having to do a workaround because every one of our vehicles, the METOC vehicle, just built in. So I think small, affordable vehicles need a whole new generation of low swap sensors that can work above and below water.
Point. Evan, wrap this one up.
Cool. I'm going to tag on to Clara's point in that the obvious answer is that for industry to invest in low-cost sensors at scale, we've got to be confident that the scale is there. If we build it, they will come, and lots of them. And that often isn't the case. And so working with the groups that incentivize towards this development, a common approach is to provide funding for a first article or a prototype, where if certain things are met, maybe there will then be funding to scale it. And that's usually not interesting enough for industry players to want to take the risk and get involved. I think there's a mismatch of understanding what it takes to build one of something versus then turning around and building 1,000 or 10,000 of something. And so I think a new idea would be instead of having this staged hardware development approach, give a big hard challenge that actually requires scaling sensing. So collect a data set on a coastline or instrument a weather system sufficiently and have that be the milestone of the first project, and have that actually require building hundreds of low-cost things, maybe thousands of low-cost things to get to that outcome.
Great. No, thanks, Evan. I'm going to move and we're going to have just a little bit of time to get to our last question, but I think it's something that we want to just get a little bit of input on before we take a break. And that is, can the ocean community define which observations can tolerate reduced sensor accuracy to lower cost? Now I'll start with Fernando.
Well, just going from what Evan just said, I think that one way to do this, even if it is not possible for the community to agree on something, at least it is possible to show that it works by completing by showing a complete study or a complete deployment in a way that the final goal is not just testing a prototype, but actually getting a network to work, or proving in large scale that the deployment of low-cost sensors works. And if we don't do that effort, if we don't aim for that last step, we end up producing things that are great, but nobody pays attention to them. And so I think what Evan says is really important. We need to target the final deployment in a large scale, and actually then treat the data and show that it works. And then people will be convinced by the data itself.
No, good points. All right, so we'll go Katie, Pete, and then we'll wrap this question with Paul.
Yeah, about the ocean community agreeing. I'm not sure if we'll get 100% consensus, but I think that just by looking at different types of science, and I mean, the short answer is it totally depends, right? A volcanologist who's looking at rocks from an eruption on the seafloor 1,000 years ago has very different temperature sensing requirements from a physical oceanographer who really needs multiple decimal places so that they can calculate the density of that packet of water. So it completely depends on the field of science that you're talking about. But I think that it would not be too difficult to go and look at a bunch of papers from a bunch of different fields and see what people are using in their calculations, in their models. Do they round it off to the nearest degree? Do they need to use, 6 or 8 decimal places? And I don't think that would be too tough to take a look at what is the range for different fields and what generally do people use to sort of narrow in on that.
Great. No, thanks, Katie. I'm going to shift question ordering here. I saw Lizzie pop on. I'd like to hear from her. We haven't gotten a chance to hear from her yet. Are you still wanting to jump in, Lizzie?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. My name's Lizzie Murray. I'm the founder of a nonprofit that operates mostly in very remote communities. So coastal communities, touching on what Evan has said, and also some points on implementation, looking at the outcome of the use of the tech and on a very large scale, and having a target to aim for. We've been working with remote surfing communities globally, very large numbers, to close the gap on nearshore data. And this is very much coming from the outcome and kind of working backwards from that. So the scale is there, the users are there, they're quite a different type of user, and that poses issues, but also a lot of interest. and also the outcome of the data and how that is used and applicable for the communities on the ground there where they're facing storm surge, some of the most vulnerable communities. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear looking at the outcome and also having a problem proposition and going back the other way to look at the effectiveness of the network you create with the tech, but also what that means for the users on the ground. Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, so we're getting tight on time. So I'm gonna end this with Sebastian because we weren't able to hear from Sebastian with some connection issues. Sebastian, are you there?
Hey, thanks. I'll try again. So I think one of the things that we look at is can we, in order to reduce the cost of an observation, is basically have our systems out there as long as possible. And this is why we work with ocean-going commercial vessels, because they spend anywhere between 40 to 80% of their time at sea. So we're getting a lot more observations for all of the costs that have been discussed that go into operating a sensor out in the deep ocean. So that was a point on the previous discussion I wanted to make. And then secondly, for this point, I think the accuracy of the data is interesting because we kind of sit between commercial operations and science. And so to Kathy's point before, where sometimes for a scientific purpose, we need super accurate data. In operational settings, like in the shipping industry, for example, a lot of the times the contracts are much more broadly defined and the data actually is very useful, and then has a commercial application, therefore can create positive ROI, which then can be leveraged to refine the measurements and invest in the technology. And then at some point it will hit certain scientific parameters or accuracy. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking, where we're like always looking at at what point is the data usable in a commercial application.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sebastian. So I'm going to end this first discussion. I think we got a lot covered. It was great to hear from so many different perspectives. At this time, I have 22 after the hour. Let's take a 5-minute break and be back at 27 after the hour. Well, welcome everyone back to the conversation. We'll get started and we get most of our folks here. All right, so let's kick off section 2, which is addressing the accessibility gap, traditional and emerging company approaches. And to paraphrase and launch the discussion, I'll add in, despite growing demand for ocean data, ocean observation remains stagnant, highlighting the need for a potential shift towards more efficient and accessible solutions. As we examined in our first session, high costs and specialized requirements have suppressed ocean data collection while also creating a companion of opportunities for a market focused on affordable sensors and platforms. So in this part of our discussion, let's explore the potential for new markets of low-cost technologies, how we would examine assumptions about price versus performance, and what are the considerations for strategies for expanding access to ocean information globally. And to kick that off, my first question is, are accessible and low-cost technologies truly revolutionary? I think we touched on that a little bit with the discussion in the first section. And if so, how might they disrupt the market? And what differentiates them from existing sensor markets? Let's go with Ben, and then Chris, and then Mark.
Yeah, hi there. My name is Ben Freeston. I work for a company called Surfline, and we've been developing a low-cost camera monitoring system for the coast. I think it's something that's interesting that low cost gives you the opportunity to do is build scale networks. And that changes the paradigm a little bit, because ideally, instead of identifying a single client upfront, the client pays for the installation of a single piece of hardware. You're in a position to build a broad data platform, multi-use, multi-purpose data, and then find an audience after the fact for that at scale. The challenge, of course, is financing that build out of the scale piece, even when the technology is suitable for that. So it's definitely something that we have to work hard to try and do, and you end up with a kind of dual approach of letting the market lead, purchasing individual pieces of hardware, but then trying to build platform level from the back of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chris.
Yeah, I think low cost does open up new areas and new markets. So for example, what we do is we put sensors on commercial fishing nets to ensure the fishers can become more sustainable with their fishing. But there's thousands of artisan fisheries across the world who could benefit from having more ocean data, but they don't want to spend what could potentially be months of their salary just to see what data does it have. So bringing the cost down actually allows them to try these systems, to collect the data they need, and then they see the value with that. So I think it's one of these situations where the user may not know what they want until you give it to them, and making low-cost sensors enables that.
No, great points. Mark.
Yeah, so we are in a, we're in a funny position. We're trying to create this very low-cost acoustic recorder here at Fisheye Collaborative. And part of the reason for that is because we want people to be able to deploy a lot more of those sensors in a smaller area. We work a lot on fish, and fish have a smaller area in which they broadcast sounds. And so you might be able to use, we know that there's a market for this kind of low-cost technology because there is an extremely low-cost sensor. And people are adopting it at a reasonable pace and trying to do science with it. But its limitations haven't been characterized, and its limitations are extensive, and it floods. And so there are reasons why I think there's a component of that marketplace that is actually being, well, it's difficult because there is a extremely low-cost sensor. And so for us, we know the market is there, and we want to serve that market. And we also want to drive up the number of sensors that people can get. And that includes both graduate students who might have $5,000, instead of buying one sensor, can buy 5, or is it small fishing villages because we created an acoustic sensor that might last for many, many, many years. Software for analysis is free, super easy to use, single push button. We've been working really hard to address the flooding issues, decrease, user error potential, all of these things to try and drive up that ability for more and more people to use it. So we're creating a market, trying to serve a market, trying to correct a market that went a little too low. It's very complicated, but I think through all of those, there's got to be some space for this.
No, great points. Pete.
Hey, so I wanted to just say something controversial here, which is that sometimes low cost isn't necessarily revolutionary because it's going backwards to go forwards, which is kind of what Mark was getting at, I think. But I mean, like, for example, if I have to deploy a whole bunch of dissolved oxygen sensors, am I going to be doing a bunch of optodes at thousands of dollars a piece, or am I going to do galvanic sensors, which are literally from the last century, but 150 to 175 bucks a piece instead? I'm going to go backwards to go forwards. So the technology may wind up having to be less advanced, but the results that you get out of it are probably going to be parallel. And by being able to deploy more, then there's other things that you can reach. I also wanted to bring up the incredibly important work that Emil and the folks at Lancelot have been doing for doing comparisons of low-cost things, and wanted to ask her directly, how revolutionary have the things that you've been seeing come through been for your understanding of this particular market?
I think we've been testing quite few sensors in few different environments. So for now, we're still in the situation of testing. So the revolutionary, yeah, we go backwards. I agree with you, Pete. There's a lot of things that we learn how to test from scratch, from the beginning. So it's a learning curve. I put in the chat some. So in Lancelot, in the project, we develop a catalog of sensors, which is named Scoop. I put the link in the chat. I will put it again. This place is basically, it's a catalog for now of all the low-cost sensors we find on the market. Of course, all of you who have devices that fit the bill, please send us the information. We'll happily put it there. I think it's important to have a place where we can have where the scientists, the users, all the developers of sensors can actually have a place where they can see what each other are doing, what each other are needing. And this is what this place is about, basically. Thanks,
Thank
Pete.
you. Yeah, thanks for tag teaming that question too. And Pete, I'm getting a sense that you had your hand raised in the last session, and feels like this might have covered a little bit what you wanted to share there. So thanks for that. Evan, and then Jeff, and then we'll move on to question 2.
Well, I actually don't think reducing costs has any hope of revolutionizing sensing. When we think about it from a manufacturer standpoint, and I want to avoid picking on anyone in particular, so I'm going to come up with an obscure, let's say a fluorometer. Hopefully no one is working on building a low-cost fluorometer. If you are, I'm sorry. But let's imagine there's a fluorometer solution out there that people want and use, and it's $20,000 a pop, and we can dramatically reduce the cost of that to $2,000. If that expands the market to 10 times as many people, we're break even on revenue. Maybe we have expanded impact because more people who want this thing can use it. The problem is the number of humans on the planet who want fluorometer data, insert anything else we've talked about here, is vanishingly small. So I don't think there's a lurking precipice of cost where there's this amplifying threshold effect, where if we can only get it so cheap, then it'll unlock a leveraged market. The other part of your question, though, Hans, is on accessibility, and that's where I think pushing is. Because even though there's only a few humans who want fluorometer data, that data has value to lots and lots of people who don't understand it. So investing in the accessibility making it so that you don't have to understand the data at the raw level, adding layers of intelligence. So I checked out the intelligent surf camera. That's really cool. It's not raw video data, Ben. It is the data that surfers actually want. So you're not selling cameras anymore. You're selling this kind of more domain level thing. I'd apply the same rubric to the underwater acoustic recorder. Of very few people want raw underwater acoustic recordings and know what to do with it. But if you add layers of intelligence that make the data more accessible to broader audiences, I think that has a potential for a revolutionary threshold. I think cost is valuable to do. It's valuable to do as a business to keep pushing and expanding the markets. I don't think it touches what we think of as revolutionary, though.
All right. No, thanks for sharing that, Evan. That's good. All right, Jethan, and then Lizzie, we'll wrap this with you. And then we will move on to our next question.
Thanks. I just want to echo what the previous speakers have said. And for me, this accessible ocean technology space is more about democratization than revolutionary. We need to, or we're trying to increase access to the users or to potential users, and not replace your traditional high cost sensors. I think those will always have a place in the market somewhere.
Right. And Lizzie?
Yeah, just to reiterate Jason's point as well, we're looking at these community dashboards. So the remote communities we work with, the data they collect is then presented in a digital platform for them that is meaningful, accessible, and that they can act on and take actions with. And I think that's a really interesting part of where all this can go and how it really can be democratized. Thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you. All right, so let's move on. Next question. Where is the market most primed for transformation? What does that look like? Is that technological advancement, market size, broad applications? What are those factors that you really feel will drive transformation? And then is there a sweet spot where multiple factors intersect and that will really then drive change? Emily.
Hi. I think there's 2 points here that make me react. Is that the broad application is, as we've seen in the project I just mentioned, we're testing some device which were built for a certain purpose, and we test them in different environment for different purposes. So it will broaden ultimately the application of the devices. Even if this is all in a test phase, but I think the money actually. I work for a governmental agency, and we do mandated by the government some observation monitoring, and the cost of running the monitoring is increasing. And we have time series in Sweden, because I'm located in Sweden, sorry, I didn't mention, over 100 years old, which is pretty unique in Europe. And we are looking into dropping down this number of measurements. And we've seen with demonstration with equipping fishing vessels with sensors via the FVON network, that we can add to the traditional monitoring in place low-cost sensors and increase this monitoring. So these are, for example, points where it could be good for the money could drive the market actually.
Yeah, good point. Lizzie.
Thanks. Maybe one of the sweet spots includes the diversity of information delivery, and having a broader information delivery audience, users, etc. I think that could be an interesting part.
Pete, then Michael, and then we'll wrap this. Well, Pete, and then Michael, and then we'll move on to the next.
I'm sorry if I just keep showing up in question after question here, but I have some thoughts. Honestly, I think that where the market is most primed, you have to actually take a look at the fact that we're talking about multiple different markets here. And the main thing that I'd point out is that I think the market that's most primed for an advance in technology or a lowering in cost to make a big difference, and this is kind of a conversation that's been going on in the chat, is any market where deployment costs are low. So coastal, intertidal, estuarine environments, I think, are really where you're going to see lowering in cost or large amounts of sensors being available make a large and direct change and engage more and more not-for-profits, academic institutions, fisheries, fishermen, etc., because of the fact that in close to the shore, where it's easy to get things and it's easy to get to, I think is by far going to be more important in the short term to people who are going to be able to spend small amounts of money on getting data that's going to affect their everyday life. And I think that when we're talking about physical oceanography in deeper waters, that's an entirely different market. We're talking about aviation versus aerospace here, equivalent. And so I think the smaller scale market is larger, whereas the larger scale market is actually smaller insofar as number of participants, even if not necessarily mission budget.
No, good point. Clara.
So the other market, the physical oceanography, deep ocean, I think that the biggest change is endurance. So what we're seeing is improving battery technology. Our Sentinel glider, we just doubled the size and it could be out for several years with high energy sensors. That's what you have to look at, is look at cost per profile. What we find, we look at that all the time. What we find is that customers buy based on the cost of the vehicle, not the cost per profile. And that's an essential change you need to make in how you think about these things.
Yeah, cost per data point. I agree. Yeah. We'll finish this question with Katie, then Michael. Then we'll move on to question 3.
Thanks. I want to sort of pose a question to your question. And like, what is the geographical market of many of the companies here? Because, you know, my team's done a lot of research on deep sea capacity. Obviously, that's what I do, benthic observations. And most countries, most communities around the world don't have access to ships, don't have access to vehicles, don't have access to sensors. So bringing down the costs of all these things potentially could open up new geographical markets, because there is interest out there. And there is desire for people to be able to explore and research and understand their own waters, particularly as outside pressures come and are trying to do things perhaps in somebody's waters, but that country doesn't have the ability to research and understand what those resources are, how they should be managed, and other aspects like that. So you know, most of the panel here is from North America or Europe and other very well-resourced areas. And I feel like we don't have the perspective of people who perhaps are from less resourced areas, but need these kinds of tools and information.
No, and absolutely, and great points. And it's always a goal of these dialogues to try and get that geographical representation as best we can. But when we have gaps, you know, the questions you raise are important. And maybe that's something people can iterate in on the chat as we move through this and some of the people who are observing. Michael?
Oh, Michael, I think you're on mute.
We sell vehicles or developing vehicles that are dual use. So they'll go to the private sector, and we're talking with universities. But I think that one of the biggest things is going to be the military. U.S. military, allied militaries are deciding that long duration vehicles, as Clara said, are incredibly important. The dollars that are flowing now are stunning. And as we begin to move from hand-built vehicles to contract manufacturing vehicles, there's going to be a much bigger demand for sensors, and that demand will also drive the price down. So universities and not-for-profits buy relatively small amounts. Their budgets are limited. They're often using money that comes from grants. The government obviously is the government. And if they want to buy 1,000 or 2,000 or 50,000 of something, our goal is to sell tens of thousands of vehicles. That means we're going to buy, multiples of sensors on those. So contract manufacturing, government spending, and we believe, because we're one of two companies that can work above and below water, that the ability to submerge is going to require additional innovation for sensors that can work above and below water. Those areas that we think are going to be huge drivers.
All right. Well, thanks, Michael. So I'm going to move to this next question, and I know that we've gotten some input already, but I'd like to see if we can tease out a little more from the entire group here, and that is, what are areas of consideration in your business case when including cost-effective technologies? And does that grow your customer base opportunity? How are market dynamics influencing those considerations? Paul, start with you.
Thank you, Hans. Just a quick reply quickly to Katie. I'm actually South African. I'm based here in South Africa. One of the other colleagues on here is also Juliet from Scion, an incredible organization, also South African, and Jethan as well, also South African. We are still, however, very blessed in what we have available to us. But what Scion, Jethan in particular, with a lot of the work that he does with the NGOs, as well as being able to get the technology that he needs, or both of them be able to get the technology that they need in order to facilitate how they operate. Where we've come from in Opscape is that we've had to have an ability where you've literally talked about the capability of ships to deploy, monitoring equipment and so forth is a very, very big feature for us that we have to take into account. And it's why we've had to develop really cost-effective, lightweight, simple monitoring devices for this. Why people like Jethan and also Juliet have to use this as well. I think Juliet previously mentioned as well, a repair and modular, because in the third world, these are not always available to you. They take time to come over to you. We don't make any sensors here. If we were to make sensors in the third world, they would never be accurate enough to be accepted by the first world. When we go through to the first world, to the third world, sorry, and put forward a proposal to them, the opposite happens as well. We are never seen to be good enough because we are being judged against first world validation techniques, because that is what is purchased out, and that's how the industry operates at the moment. So these are the sort of considerations we technically have to overcome and consider on a regular basis. They are big problems for us. We do try to work around there, but there seems to be a lot of barriers to overcome at the moment where we can go forward.
Paul, have you seen any shift in more recent years with that changing, or is it still yet to be?
It's not so much a change. I think what has really taken into account is the fact that technology has actually moved forward, and because technology has moved forward, it's been more accessible because it's been cheaper. For example, taking out a lot of things where we had a lot of wave buoys that rely on RF technology and so forth. Accelerometers, electronics have got really, really smaller, more affordable. They are made a lot in the Far East as well for the electronics. So those are available more to the masses in the way of bulk production and also pricing wise. These have made big, big impacts in the industry.
Great. No, thanks for adding that on. We'll go Lauren, and then we'll wrap this question with Pete.
Yeah, when it came in business cases, in fact, the way we do it is that first we address the three main markets, which are defense, research, and marine energy in general, both oil and gas and wind farms. And we address them with two different business models. One which is sales, where they can buy the glider and the sensors. And the other one, which is service, where they can buy data as a service as well. And we need all of them to try to keep our business running.
Yeah, multiple solutions for that. Pete.
So I think the other thing to consider is this is kind of also talking to what Paul was mentioning. So in our not-for-profit, we're looking at citizen scientists as being an asset, especially when it comes to measuring things in coastal and estuarine environments. And one of the ways that we've been getting credence for data is because of the fact that we go through a NIST traceable calibration process for everything that we're putting out sensor-wise, at least for water chemistry. And so being able to have that in other places has also been useful. It's not a marine application, but when we've done water chemistry work, for example, in the Amazon rainforest, then those things are still calibrated to a NIST traceable set of standards, and then the data become more portable. So that's been one way that I think I see that particular use case going into a different customer base and also kind of scaling to smaller end users while still maintaining data integrity that makes it so that larger users or more resourced users is probably the better way of putting it, can still take the data seriously.
No, good points. All right, let's move on to the last question in this section. And that is, what are the primary risks and how are inherent risks and uncertainties being managed? Fernando.
So just continuing on what Paul and also Pete said, when developing these low-cost sensors, we always have to our platforms. We have to be very aware that there's this barrier of that we need to overcome. And so for us, one big concern is not to spoil our reputation or not to screw up right in the beginning. So I think it's really important to when we are creating something to be certain that it will work as intended, so that we don't damage more the image that we have just because we are low cost. That's it. That's the thing I want to say.
Good. No, thank you. Juliet.
Thanks. So I think for us in our case, the sort of main risks really lie in data quality, and what some of the comments have been made allude to that, the financing and of course the long-term sustainability. And I think, managing these by, maybe validating low-cost sensors against reference systems is one way to help grow that confidence in data quality, and also to really communicate with the end users to build the trust and the market uptake. But I also think that compliance, when we talk about data, compliance with data and international, with local and international data principles, really also lends towards transparency, but also this sort of equitable access and sharing best practices, even with low-cost sensors, how to develop them, how to deploy them, how to validate the data, really helps. And I think, I just want to make a shout out for the IOC Ocean Best Practices System, which has actually been supporting accessible sensor development and the best practices behind that and sharing of the data. And I think initiatives like that really help strengthen sort of the global standards as well as the regional capacity.
Thanks, Julia. Let's go to Mark.
Yeah, I'm just reacting to that thing about basically getting out the door with a really high quality thing that people trust and works the way you do. I'm sort of trying to stay awake here after driving 10 hours back from a testing facility last night so that we can, take our very low cost sensor and bring it up to a level that I think is, a professional standard. But that requires spending, say, well, we didn't get it all done in a day. So $20,000 on a Navy facility to test a low cost sensor. Well, nobody does that. And so nobody's done that on the sensor above us or the sensor below that. So in order to explain our value proposition, we actually have to take all three of them in there. And that's now going to cost me more money to explain people where we sit in that space, and put these things under pressure and see if they actually hold up under pressure and look at whether or not these sensors we know our sensor is pressure dependent. No one's ever tested it on some of the other things out there. So we actually have to do the legwork to explain where we fit into the marketplace, to try and explain our value proposition, And that getting out there with something that explains who we are in a way that actually says, hey, we're doing this in a professional level, but at a relatively low cost. A lot of risk in that, I think, coming out in the marketplace. We haven't sold, well, other than the first 10 we sold to Synchro, prototypes to Synchro. We haven't sold a device yet. So getting out the door with our first shipment beyond ourselves in a way that we can stand behind and say what people are really measuring is super important to us. A lot of risk going out the door the first time.
Yeah, yeah. First out is not a good feeling sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks, Mark. All right, so we're gonna go Pete, and then Michael will let you give last words on this question.
So I think there are actually two big risks. One is just not doing anything. Basically, getting into a position where you feel as though, well, I can't really see that market paying enough. And at that point, it's a matter of figuring out how to get the instrumentation out the door by finding other funding streams. Because if you can't get the funds to get an important instrument out the door from clientele alone or customers alone, there needs to be another way to figure out how to do that rather than just giving up on the possibility of detecting whatever you're trying to instrument for. The other thing that I think is a big risk is actually on the education side. One of the programs we've been trying to work on at Field Kit is our field schools, where we're actually doing education for the people who are going to be deploying our stuff, both on how to do the deployments and such, but also on how to analyze the data, what the data means to you. And this is like small environmental not-for-profits rather than necessarily like university departments. So being able to pull that in means now we've got part of the citizenry actually being informed about the science that's going on and the data that's coming in. If you look at both of those two ends of the spectrum insofar as where the risks are, it's a matter of don't give up on big ideas, and also at the same time, don't think that you're part of such a small minority of humanity that understands what we're trying to find out there in the oceans that you can't communicate it to other people. It's your business, my business, everybody's business to share what we do with as many people as we can and bring them on board to understanding how important environmental data is. And I'll shut up now. Sorry.
No, thanks, Pete. No, that's no need to shut up. That was excellent. Appreciate that. All right, Michael.
For any early stage innovative company, capital is a big deal. And there is just not enough capital, particularly when you get into really disruptive technologies. You know, it's really hard to prove a market when you've got something that the market doesn't know it really needs. So I'd say capital is a big risk. Number two is sourcing is a big risk for us. United States today, if you sell to the US government, they want you to buy US. And as an example, batteries, we don't want to use lithium ion batteries because it has big risk. Moving it, you can't put it in a plane, you can't put it in a submarine. So we've been, done a study, and we're going to be going to lithium iron phosphate, so LiFo batteries. And there's only one company in the United States that's been spooling up to do LiFo batteries. That's a risk. And getting those packaged. Everything else was primarily from China, if you care about LiFo batteries. So again, you have to balance, if you're talking about long duration, I don't want my vehicles to go up in flames after a week or a month or 2 months. So batteries is an issue. We're looking at actuators. There's lots of actuators out there, but they're almost all foreign made if they're small, and they have a tendency to use power to hold it once it gets to a spot. So I'm talking about my rudder, for example. So we've actually had to create our own linear actuator because it uses too much power. So I'd love for somebody to have had an actuator that we could use that when it moved at some place, it stopped using power. So, from an industry point of view, capital, knowing where you can source, getting the right products that give you the right quality for what you need is a big deal. And we're not making one product, we're making a whole vehicle. It includes some sensors because we've had to build them. So those are all risks for us.
No, I appreciate it. And that's a good point, that capital is always going to be on everyone's minds, but there are all those follow-on components that still drive where all that risk is in getting a product out the door. So I'd like to thank everyone for a great second discussion session. Let's take a 5-minute break. Again, stretch your legs, and then I will see everyone at 7 after the hour. We'll have everyone join back and we'll get started with our third session before we open it up to the entire audience, including the observers who are on the call. All right, well, thanks everyone for great discussion so far. I know we're getting a lot out of the discussion in terms of how we can move forward with looking at this from a much broader and inclusive perspective. And this last section is going to pull a little bit on some of the ideas and thoughts that people shared in our first discussion period. But this one, let's look at beyond the cost of the sensor or the platform. What are other barriers to access and potential solutions? So we can build out some of the threads that you started. And this was really also discussed in our first dialogue session that we held 3 weeks ago. And that is lowering sensor costs alone does not guarantee accessibility. There are operational and perceptual challenges, as well as total ownership costs, including maintenance and operations, and that also limit the access. Sorry. So understanding these barriers is key to developing solutions that make ocean observing systems truly accessible. And so what I want to start with is, what are those additional costs that should be considered beyond the purchase price? Is that calibration, durability, power requirements, deployment? I'd like to hear from the group on that. And Katie, start with you.
Yeah, I feel like we've touched on some of these here and there and some of the various questions, but ease of deployment and recovery is certainly one. Easy to use software for mission programming, having visual interfaces that people can use to program the missions, not having to have a software engineer on staff to be able to use the thing that you're trying to do. Data storage and analysis is a huge one. Fixability, I think, I can't remember. Juliet mentioned this earlier, being able to fix things in country, having to send them back to the original company is a huge barrier. Similarly, calibration, being able to do that by yourself locally and not having to send it back to a country, somewhere else to be calibrated. And I feel like somebody may have touched on this earlier, but it hasn't been talked about a whole lot. But training and support is a huge one. Not just shipping off a piece of equipment and expecting somebody to be able to use it and use it well, but rather supporting people and ensuring that they have the tools that they need, the knowledge that they need, especially in places that don't currently or haven't historically had access to observing technologies.
Yeah, no, good points. Emily.
Thanks. I agree with what Katie mentioned. And one thing as an academic that comes very strong to me is the use of the data. We need to be able to have the data, the metadata, have to access to them. I have examples of great devices which are easy to use, that could be used by citizen science communities, etc. But we stop in some ways because we can't access the data. So we really need to have a way to get the data in a fair way, in an easy way, and to be able to handle them. And all that comes also with what Katie was saying, training, not training only on how to use the device, but also how to get the data and what to do with this data, where to put them on platform, open access platform, where they can be used by as many users as possible, academia and others, by the way. Yeah, so the data for me is what really come to mind.
Great. Paul and then Pete.
I kind of feel like I'm going to echo what Pete said earlier, but he did make a comment when he said aviation versus space travel, which I think is exactly right when we're talking about between even terrestrial deployments out in the field, down to coastline, beaches, and then you go offshore and the costs are a lot more. And that's because it's harder to get out there. It is like space travel. But if there was a way to actually really fire and forget a sensor out there, that would be good. If it was affordable, if it was accessible, with what technology we've got now for anything for satellite communications, which has really gone down quite a lot in cost-wise. And then also putting on top of that, which Emily and also Katie and even yourself also said about, Peter, was about software support on that. Server costs are becoming a lot more cheaper as well, virtual server costs, the capability to store as much data as you want. How you use that data, as well as Emily said as well, is very important. No idea how many customers we have who literally utilize our products and others and don't really do anything with the data afterwards. It's almost criminal. There should be something done to ensure that that is a suppository that is available to all, and there shouldn't be any limits, and there should be no subscriptions on software either. You should have the availability to it. We have the capability to offer it to people. I don't know why we're still stuck in paying for subscriptions.
Yeah, no, good points. And I think the education of the use of the data is key to build on that. Yeah, Pete, go to you.
First of all, Paul, basically what you're saying we need is the oceanic equivalent of what CubeSats have done for aerospace. Then to echo everything that's been said before me is true insofar as additional costs, but I think there's two other additional costs, and maybe this is my pie in the sky idealist talk here, but I think there's a cost insofar as the subsidy side of things. This is what I was talking about before, where it's like you need to make certain that the instrument goes out and that the data gets gathered for a purpose, no matter what the actual cost is. So, like, for example, for us as a not-for-profit, we subsidized certain applications and certain sales just so that the person who's buying the thing can make the measurement they need to, even though to us it comes at a greater cost. So being able to depress the price artificially so that the people who are in most need of the data can get it. That is a cost that I don't think anybody really talks about. And then similarly, there's the moral and ethical cost. If the data that you're getting is going to be contributing to oil and gas exploration that then contributes to high carbon footprint applications, then are you willing to necessarily take that money and go forward if that's if the environmental and ecological and ethical side of the question has been presented to you and you have that information? So those are, once again, costs that a lot of people don't think about, but they weigh heavy on some of us. So I just want to share them.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks, Pete. I just caught a quick chat here too, and I just like this one. As a lowly grad student, 1,000% things should be open source. So thanks for the comedy there, but very true. So now I'm going to jump ahead to question number 3 in this section. Just I think we've touched a little bit on some of the gaps. We may go back there with some of the discussion we have, but is there currently a stronger focus on fit for purpose sensors rather than versatile systems that increase accessibility? I think people have touched on this quite a bit through this discussion so far, but it'd be great to hear more. Jason, start with you.
Thanks, Hans. So yeah, I think it's goes back to Evan's comment about the tender specifications. A lot of the time are outdated or very specific, and I think that drives a lot of the demand. Is that the fit for purpose is driven by sort of specifications that might not be necessary or might be overspec'd, and I think it's better to provide what is the end goal and let innovative companies figure out the best, most cost-effective solution rather than trying to achieve accuracy or specific parameters.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Other thoughts? Let's go with Evan first.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I agree, Jason. I think it's somebody in the comments in the chat earlier remarked that there are some applications where you're coastal and looking at diurnal variations in shallow water, and a 0.1 degree accurate temperature sensor will measure everything you want. And there are other applications where you really need 1,000th of a degree accuracy. And I think that is part of the interesting challenge and fun of this domain, is that there's such a variety in the needs. But I do think there is far too much emphasis on trying to corner those very specific specs and requirements, and then fan that out to manufacturers to pick and choose, rather than talk about what are we actually trying to do with this data? Like, why do we care about 0.1 here or 0.001 there? Are there creative solutions where we could get the same insight and results without worrying about thousandths of degree temperature? Maybe there's something else in the water that we could be measuring or understanding that would be a more effective way of getting to that answer.
No, good point. Greg, let's go to you.
I think we shouldn't diminish the intellectual contribution of the person who is obtaining the instrumentation to decide on what specification is needed. It's not necessarily that overspecking occurs a lot of the time, although there are mistakes made when people ask for instance, 1,000th of a degree Celsius when they're in coastal waters where the variation is tenths of degrees. But it's more that there's an inability to really, it's not possible to narrow this down to the idea of fit for purpose versus versatile. I think maybe the question is just phrased in a way that I think it's difficult to answer that globally. You might be polling a group of people here with all of our prejudices and our personal experience, but I think the horses for courses, there are many applications for complete range of both ends of the spectrum. So it's very difficult to necessarily say one end of the spectrum is invalid or an unnecessary focus.
No, good point. Sebastian, I don't know if you had a hand up and you had connectivity issues, or if your question just went away. I want to jump and see if that's still out there.
Yeah, I think Evan actually touched on what I was going to say. And maybe one more thing that I can throw out there is, what we're also looking at is data that's being collected on these ships for different purposes, and sort of leveraging the data. That's one element. So, for example, sea surface temperature is used in the operations, but can also be interesting scientifically. The other one is inferring data. So we have motion sensing capabilities, and with which we can then leverage to reconstruct sea states. So having a sensor that's typically used for something else can still yield, or you can infer other data. AIS data is another source for us for this kind of thing. So just wanted to add those things.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Michael, I'll let you wrap up this question. Oh, we got you on mute, Michael.
Sorry, trying to be nice to everybody else. I keep turning off my microphone. Apologies. Obviously, industry is different than the private sector. I don't have a payroll. Somebody's not paying me to be a professor or a researcher. We've got to run that risk. Waking up in the middle of the night sweating if you're going to be able to make payroll is a tough thing to do. So raising capital and then talk about making all the data free. It's the user that makes that decision, not us. And many of the users just aren't going to allow us to do that. But when we can, every one of my vehicles is going to be a METOC vehicle, and we're going to ask if we can make that information available. But again, being a for-profit company, in order to be able to provide benefits and grow the company and have the IP development, we have 11 issued patents and 8 patents pending. I've got to be able to keep making money. So I can't just give away information. So we can try and make it as affordable as possible. But the idea that it should be free, while laudatory, I think is not realistic for a lot of these private sector companies. Fit for purpose sensors, and even back to an earlier question about perhaps lower sensitivity. One of the things we're dealing with right now is looking at acoustics, because that's a big deal underwater. And rather than having vectored sensors or sensing capability. We're looking at omnidirectional opportunities, and then putting out multiple vehicles. Because then if you do that, I can figure out where somebody's coming from, what their speed is, and so I don't have to put out 8 sensors and try and figure out what getting that from one vehicle. I can do it with 5 or 6 or 8 vehicles. So I think this plethora and fleet opportunity with vehicles is really going to allow us to use more technologies, and some will be fit for purpose because the user asked for that, and some will be hopefully more versatile, if you will. So we will use whatever addresses what the user tells us they need.
Oh, good. No, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think versatility might be driven by some new AI solutions that allow things to tune based on needs, and I'm sure that that's coming. So, so I'm going to skip forward now to number 4, and that is how important are decentralization and local repairability to reduce usage costs and minimize downtime? And it's been touched on a little bit. I think there's a little bit more we could pull out of this. Juliet, I'll get started with you.
Thanks. So yeah, we have already discussed it, but I think also this is where it really comes in, the difference between CapEx and OpEx, and also in under-resourced countries, it's often very easy to buy CapEx. Well, not very easy, but there's often a budget, right, to buy a piece of infrastructure. But then the operating costs are never accounted for. I mean, not just the deployment, but as we've spoken about, the maintenance. So, and often people aren't really fully aware of what it means when you buy a piece of infrastructure, what exactly the costs are going to be afterwards. So what we've talked about, the modularity and whether you can fix it in-house or locally rather than sending it away, it has huge different impacts for the costs, but also just for the ability to use the infrastructure and not just have it sitting there as a shiny piece of infrastructure. I think that applies to, accessible technologies and the more traditional technologies.
No, thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I would say the sensors here themselves can help as well, the sensor platforms, because they can monitor their own performance and identify when they need calibrating and when they need repair themselves. So on our sensors, we measure how long they've been underwater, and that gives us a good proxy for when they actually need calibration and repair. So one way of reducing the costs is to transmit this information and have this data available both for the users or for managers who may be managing a fleet of sensors as well. So I think there are options with the sensor platforms themselves where they can assist the users in their repairability and calibration.
No. And I'm just going to add in a comment from the chat from Andrew Bernard, and looking at it, that technical knowledge expertise for the workforce that just keeps these things running. You may have a great and robust opportunity to use a platform, but you lose that talent, and then it does become that shiny object on the shelf. And those are very expensive short-term fixes if you don't have somebody that you can grab quickly. So let's go to the final question in this discussion area, and that is there an inherent distrust with affordable or low-cost solutions? Pete, we'll start with you.
I've been working uphill against it for years now. There definitely is, and the more research I do, the less I think it actually is reasonable. The thing is that cost feels more and more. The more and more you check different sensing systems, and the more you check different sensors against each other, it feels more and more as though cost is just an inflation of something in some cases. Not all cases. But the thing is that the actual accuracy that you get out versus the price that you pay there's no longer a function defining the two things. It's more arbitrary than that.
No, thanks, Pete. Let's go, Nadia.
I would say if there is a lot of effort taken to prove a good performance of a low-cost sensor very regularly by comparing it or recalibrating it with high accurate instruments, then the distrust decreases a lot. But the effort needs to be taken to say, like, I reference it regularly with high cost instruments to prove that my performance is really as good as needed for the deployment.
No, very good point. Emily, then Katie, then Jason.
I think there's 2 points here. There's there's again cost-effective sensors versus cost-effective sensors. If they are used and deployed by people who know how to use the device and know how to recalibrate, etc., then you can have a certain trust. You can manage to convince people that the data are trustworthy. Now, if these are devices that are deployed by citizen science activities, for example, then the distrust is a bit bigger. And I work with a bunch of modelers. They need more data, so they're very keen on hearing more from data coming from local sensor, but at the same time, they're not so sure they can use them. So I would say it's a yes, and yeah, hopefully we go towards a no a bit more. I think it depends.
Yeah. Katie.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there has been inherent distrust, but people are more open to the idea now than ever before. I mean, just look at this discussion, all these people talking about lower cost things. So, things like this haven't happened before. So I think that there's potentially more acceptance of it. But again, it totally depends on the user's needs, what their requirements are for the data that they need to collect. I'm also curious to see in the next, 6 months to a year's, with current cuts to federal budgets in the US here, are people going to have to move toward lower cost solutions than higher cost sensors and systems that they've been used to for, the recent past?
Yeah. Jason.
To continue what Katie mentioned, it is user specific. But for specifically offshore deployments, I think you're paying for the decrease in the risk of failure, or that's at least assumed and proven over time and legacy. So it's either you reduce or you increase your tolerance for the risk of that failure. If you're paying a lot of money to get out, more money to actually get to site to do your observations or for a certain period of deployment, you're assuming you're paying for the decrease in the risk of failure.
Thanks, Jason. And Michael, we'll wrap this question with you.
We're happy to look at low cost, affordable sensors. We do it all the time. And whether it's TI or it's Qualcomm microprocessors, we still have to go out and test them because it's a little bit like driving your car, and they say you can get 30 miles to the gallon, but the way you drive, you might get 23 miles to the gallon because they've optimized that. So no matter what it says in the cut sheet, we find that we have to look at everything. The problem you have with low cost is if you buy it, then particularly for early stage company, and this relates to us as well, but are you going to be there in 2 years and 5 years to take care of whatever the problems are? And will it work for a day or 5 days? But if we're going out for 6 months, I've got to make sure that things work for a long period of time. So, it's not that we're against low cost. We're looking always for low swap stuff. But we test it when it comes in. We test it as long as we can. And again, just because of our needs, we're not going out for 3 days or 4 days or 6 days. We're going out for 5 months, 6 months. And then we go, we're above water and we're below water. So, the issue is maybe it works above water, but is it going to get water in it when it goes underwater, down to 100 meters and it's got 165 PSI, and we got to test down to 150 to 175 meters and know that we can rate it at 100. So there's a lot of issues that go into it. I don't think we at least have any bias against low cost. as long as we can feel comfortable that it does what it says it's going to do, and it's going to be very reliable, and that our customers will agree to it.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Michael. And thanks, everybody. Getting through this three-part discussion, I think really uncovered quite a bit of insight from the group. And we're going to do another short 5-minute break. But this is when we come back, when we bring in our entire audience to join the conversation for the rest of today. And that conversation will continue until either we hit our time or until the conversation stalls. So we've got a large audience. I think we're going to have some good input. There's been plenty of communication going on in the chat. So I'd like to see everyone at 39 after the hour, and we'll get things wrapped up. Right, I'll ask everyone to come back on for this last session. All right, well, I'm going to start and just number one, say thanks to everyone, both panel or participants that we've had going through the discussion that it's been great today, but also a very robust chat by all the observers. And so now is an opportunity for everyone who has been observing and perhaps putting information into the chat to actually raise hand and ask a question for our participants on the screen. And so what I'll ask you to do is use the raise hand feature, and then we'll call on you individually and you'll be unmuted by Casey. And we do have a large audience, so hopefully we get to everyone's questions. But if not, I hope you understand that we're just trying to fit the time that we have left. And so we'll go until about 55 after the hour, at which time, if we don't have any more questions, we'll stop. Or if we hit the 55 after the hour, we'll close things down. So think about questions that you've held or that you've asked in the chat that you want to get additional insight in. And remember, as Zdenka pointed out in the very beginning, we're really looking for actionable items that come out of this discussion and how we can move forward with some of the input that you provide. So with that, I'm going to open the floor up to the audience and call on individuals with questions or comments they'd like to make. Okay. Fabio.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon. Congratulations for the webinar. It's really interesting and important. I'm Fabio from University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I would like to know what needs to be done to bring the concepts of metrology and standardization for the International Standardization Organization, BIPM, into our developments and the market.
Great, thank you. Pete, you want to take that first?
Sure, as a former calibration technician, not just an academic. Spent the first year and a half out of college running around calibrating things in central Pennsylvania. And the main thing is that from a educational standpoint, being able to teach about calibration is something that your National Standards Institute will have a whole curriculum for. But specifically ISO 17025, as Greg's pointing out there, as well as ISO 9000 series, both give you a lot of good frameworks to work within. The problem is that they don't actually educate people on how to use them. Organizations like in the US, ASQ, the American Society for Quality, and then services like A2LA offer a considerable amount of material online for actually teaching people, some of it even free, what exactly calibration traceability looks like, how to implement it, and where to go from there.
Thanks, Pete.
I'll put a couple of links in the chat.
Good. Any other input from our participants today? Okay. Let's call next hand. That would Pierre. Would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. So this is Pierre. I'm working with Kongsberg Discovery. I'm part of the executive team of the Ocean Enterprise and of this dialogue series. Thank you very much for this really enriching, information wealthy discussion. This was very, very nice. I think it underlined once more how important a dialogue between public and private representatives is, because it really revealed as well how different the challenges and the constraints for the different sectors are, and how important it is to communicate about them, right? There was a comment about why didn't the price drop when the companies start to produce the sensors. There was a little bit about where does the funding come from? So I think it is very, very important to have this exchange. And what it also triggered from my perspective was maybe we should also rethink a little bit about business to business collaboration, right? Maybe competition is very hard and sometimes over determining what we're actually doing. So maybe there is more capabilities if we think about collaboration also between businesses. Something that came up was a lot on the data qualities, and it was mentioned the fair aspect, right? The reusability. You put data into repositories and they are supposed to be reused. And obviously, the measurements are not always made for the single measurement, but more and more there's this demand for repetitive usage. That's why you need the metadata. That's why you need to know what the quality of the measurements was. And this, and that's my last point, brings me back to a comment that was made during the first dialogue of this third series. And this was that maybe we have to look again at the essential ocean variable scheme of Goose and maybe introduce a little bit something in the direction of what Venkat already wrote here in the chat. That is, maybe we should have a more leveled, a more layered approach there and not only look at the parameters, but give it this climate versus weather, or give it this high quality versus operational versus a large deployment, because then we have a harmonized scheme and that would allow the people to really target a little bit their sensors in this direction. Thank you very much again. Very interesting, very thought-provoking.
Thanks, Pierre. And any comments from our participants? Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, sorry, I just put it in the chat as well, but I think fair data is very important, and I think manufacturers have their role to play. In Europe, we have a module, we have a Coriolis, which is our GDAC, and Alcimar developed a module to send directly data and metadata into the GDAC.
Great, thank you. On to our next question from David.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this has been great. A lot of, as has been said, it's a lot of great discussion between public, private, and academia. And I'm with Polaris Sensor Technologies. We develop an optical system for leak and spill detection. And it's still very expensive. And so the discussion and comments are great. One way that we have been paying for the development is through the high cost, and continue that development by recouping our costs. But it seems like there's a fair amount of business models that take into account leasing, and that's something that we haven't really explored in terms of being able to both make it affordable for the user, the customer, as well as to provide somewhat of a reliable revenue stream that we can depend on for continued development. So I'd be curious to know from the various communities who what the thoughts are on leasing versus buying. The comments about low maintenance and field calibration and that kind of thing notwithstanding. I'm just curious about what the panelists' comments are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. Thoughts from the group? Greg, let's start with you.
When we look at our community of users, we find that because we largely serve an academic and research-focused community, they have CapEx funding and they do not have OpEx funding. And so product sales, as opposed to data as a service or even leasing models, are the only mechanism by which there will be a commercial transaction. For engineering groups, it's the other way around, and CapEx is difficult to obtain and OpEx is much easier. And so it really completely depends on the situation of the purchaser. It's not possible, I think, to say one is better or worse than the other. At the end of the day, for a company, you've got cash flow to manage, which is obviously easier if you receive the money up front at the product sale point or product delivery point of view, rather than data delivery. On the other hand, that's very lumpy, and you would rather have a subscription service that provides money on an ongoing basis. So it's difficult to call which is intrinsically better. I think it really depends on the situation.
Great, thanks, Greg. Mark, let's go to you.
Yeah, I mean, we thought we were going to make a low-cost sensor and simply sell it. And it's been interesting that we have been approached by people who simply say they don't actually want to buy the technology. They would like me to bundle it with functionally with service and or lease it to them in some way that comes with managing the data. And so we actually thought we would have a very simple business model that would be a very low cost. Who would want to pay an ongoing contract in any way, shape, or form for something that's so inexpensive? But there are actually people, large NGOs, giant NGOs, who can't buy technology at all, and so they don't want to have a technology cost. They want a service cost. And so for us, it becomes also another question. Well, maybe we actually want to find a service provider who will use our technology. But it's a really big challenge for a very small group trying to figure out how to get out there in the marketplace to say, leasing, I thought would be a terrible option for something incredibly inexpensive. I mean, how can I possibly do that? I got to recoup the cost on the first year anyway. So why not, why not just buy it? But that's an interesting component for us, is just, I suppose maybe we're not the target market for leasing, but we've been in the position where people are basically asking us to do it.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
I'm gonna, Michael, I'm gonna hold off on your input here. We got a couple more questions that came up on the thread here. So I'd like Andrew, please ask your question or your comment.
Sure, Andrew Barnard from Oregon State University, Associate Professor. I liked your comments, Greg, so and others that you just made, so it's a little bit relative to that. I think one of the discussions we've had in terms of low-cost sensors, data as a service, offshore versus inshore, this is kind of relative to that. So right now where we are, because in academia, as you said, we're really dependent on federal funding and federal funding cycles to keep things going and moving here, and patching together a lot of different funding mechanisms to not only do innovation, but the research. But one of the key aspects for us is really retention of our workforce, the technicians, the people who do the lab work, the field work, organize the deployments, do the deployments, the recoveries. And so for us, that's becoming more of a pressure point as we're seeing reduced amount of funding coming in to support those technicians. So in the academia sector where I work here at Oregon State, we're kind of up against this boundary of keeping that knowledge workforce moving forward and retained as programs come in and out and the federal funding drops. But then we're going back and saying industry needs to provide some role there. So I'm anxious to hear you guys' thoughts on how do we do this? It isn't necessarily industry's role to do the full value chain, but at least in terms of academia and carrying on the research, we need to retain a workforce. So we do the things we just talked about. We get the instrument in, we check it out, we put it together, we integrate it up, we deploy it, we get back, we check it out, make sure everything works. But if we're losing that workforce, then create an additional pressure in terms of the entire value chain.
Thanks, Andrew. Any comment from our participants? Go ahead, Pete.
You can count on me. I had an interesting crisis of identity back when I was a professor, wondering if the various different instrumentation systems and all the things that I was teaching about were actually a trade rather than something that would require a bachelor's degree. And I think, Andrew, you're getting at exactly that. Control systems, instrumentation, and the maintenance thereof isn't something that requires a four-year BS. It is something that we should be looking at what our labor comes in from, whether it be a 2-year associate's degree or what. But the thing is that that's still secondary to where exactly that labor is coming from in the first place. And I don't have a quick answer to that other than to say that there's going to have to be some uptake, I believe, of researchers doing maintenance in the meantime while we figure out exactly where to get that labor from in the future.
Oh, thanks, Pete. I'm going to ask that our participants, I'm going to move to the next question just because we got a couple more that came in. So maybe, Clara, if you want to add into the chat some of your thoughts, and Lauren as well. But let's move to Felix. Felix, you're muted. Okay. Maybe there's a issue there. Let's move to Kim then. Kim Martini.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Hi, I'm Kim Martini. I have my own small startup for ocean sensing, Teeny Scientific, and I have a lot of thoughts about low-cost sensors. And I think one thing we should really think about are, and I'm really trying to be provocative of this, is are scientists really the right customers for low-cost sensors? And I'm only asking this because there's like only a certain amount of customers, and we talk a lot about the barriers for entry. We needed the data to be reliable. We need data to be, accurate. We need it to be calibrating, and that like actually adds a lot of cost for that. And I think one of the really good case studies is Purple Air. I don't know if you've all looked at that. I live in the Pacific Northwest, we have wildfires. I can look on their network and they have sensors all over the place. They're direct to consumer and they're low cost sensors. And they had so many people looking at their sensors that people were calling up the EPA and they were saying, hey, your sensor doesn't match my sensor. And it's pretty, and there's just like a ton of sensors and now that sensor system that was a private system, now they have a partnership where they work with NOAA, and that data is actually on air.gov. And so that's like a sensor system that's been developed outside of science, outside of academia, that's like kind of brought back into the fold. And I think from what we're seeing, and particularly for marine science, like a lot of people want to know what a weather forecast for the ocean is. If you go to anyone at the beach, they're looking at like 5 or 6 different sites, and there's like a lot of possibilities. And I think Tiffany touched upon this in the comments as well. So it's kind of all over the place. It's like, what are we trying to use the low cost sensors for, and who can use them? If it's just like weather data, I think there's a really good opportunity for climate stuff. No, and I've been on that end of building those as well. And so you do need like the higher calibration. So I'm just throwing out there people's feelings about that.
We'll take one short comment from Evan, and then we're going to wrap things up. So Evan, you get the final thoughts for today.
I think that was a great provocative question, Kim. And scientists in general are terrible customers for hardware manufacturers. Lots of hard requirements, lots of strong opinions, generally very little money, and a challenge in connecting these outcomes to the broader scale. I think the fact that there is so much science kind of customer stakeholder in this industry also speaks to how difficult what we are trying to measure is, and the answers that we're trying to get still require proper hard science in a lot of cases. But finding avenues where we can get more connection with regular people who have concerns or questions that can be answered with ocean data is probably a more happy and efficient path. And I think it also boils back down to this accessibility and understandability challenge of bringing the data to higher and higher levels of intelligence that people can understand it more seamlessly.
Thanks, Evan. I'm going to say thanks to everybody. A fantastic conversation today. Lots of great input, and it just couldn't have gone better from my perspective. So appreciate everyone that. Zdenka, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Hans. I want to echo Hans's thanks. Another marvelous conversation, both with our moderator as well as in the chat. So we really, really appreciate that. So let me thank our organizing committee. A lot of hard work. Without them, the dialogues would not come to fruition. The group spent a lot of time curating the use case studies as well as the background paper. So let me give you a what happens next. We, the team, will prepare a draft report that is non-attributional. It is not a transcript, but rather a summary of the main points and recommendations. There is a narrative of each of the sections for further context. We'll write the report from both the transcript of the conversations as well as the chat. The participants will receive the draft report on November 10th, and we will ask you for your comments by November 17th so we can then publish the report. And with that, I want to just put a plug in for the final dialogue of this series, the business case and market maturation, which will take place on Wednesday, November 19th. So we hope that you will join us for that. So let me turn it back to you, Hans, for the final goodbye.
Great. Thanks, Zdenka. Well, again, I hope you join us on the third of this series. It's been a fantastic discussion. I wish you all a good rest of your day or evening or morning, and look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you all.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.